So when I first read the description for Stormdancer by J. Kristoff, I was somewhat intrigued, but didn't expect to be wowed by this book since steampunk wasn't really my thing. But after reading yet another romantasy flop, I was in the mood for something different and decided to give Stormdancer a try. And I was very quickly hooked. At first glance, this debut novel in the Lotus War trilogy was shaping up to be a masterpiece. And when I finished Stormdancer, I was ready to eagerly devour the following books. I was absolutely not prepared for the absolute roller coaster this series turned out to be. Let's talk about it. First off, this review will include major spoilers for the series, and I won't be doing much, if any, summary, since this review is primarily intended for people who have read the books. And lastly, let me just preemptively say sorry if I butcher any of the names. Starting off with Stormdancer, I don't really have much to say about it. Starting in the middle and jumping back to the beginning was an interesting choice and made for a great hook. The story overall is mwah. The characters, mwah. Seriously, I instantly fell in love with Yukiko, Masaru, and Akihito upon meeting them. And once Buru was introduced, I loved his dynamic with Yukiko and how well the story showed them blending together and becoming one. Initially, the only criticism I really had was the unnecessary POVs. I mean, there was an entire chapter just for one random guy in Yoritomo's palace finding the feathers that Buru had shed. And really, all we needed was Yoritomo showing the feathers to Yukiko and mentioning that a cleaner had found them. But to be clear, these one-off POVs aren't just a problem with Stormdancer, but the series as a whole. And I especially felt it in book 2. Kinslayer was so bloated with redundant and unnecessary POVs. One example in particular that stuck out to me was Michi's. Yes, I'm sure we all love Michi, but we already had eyes and ears in the palace via Hana's POV. And she did a much better job of filling that role than Michi, who was stuck in a single room for most of the book. Hana was even in contact with Michi, so whatever information we needed regarding Michi could have been revealed through Hana anyway. And let's be honest, the only thing really going on with Michi in Kinslayer was her relationship with Ichizo, which added nothing to the overall story. So let's talk about what the main characters are up to in this book. Yukiko's powers have gone off the charts. So, after indulging in alcoholism, she and Buru go looking for information that will help her manage the kenning. And while searching for this information, they run into cannibal ghost monks that never appear again after this singular scene. Yes, you heard that right. Kristoff introduced cannibal ghost monks into his story just to never bring them up again. What the actual After that point, Yukiko and Buru are unintentionally swept off into a sequence of events, which ultimately exist to introduce Kaya and Pyotr, and to set up the Morkaben invasion of Shima and Buru's mysterious backstory. Now, that mysterious backstory is the reason why the book is named the way it is. But I think it's worth saying that the title of Kinslayer really threw me off. Keep in mind that one of the main characters in this series is literally called Kin. So part of me was convinced that Yukiko was going to end up killing Kin for some reason. Plus, while Kaya does repeatedly refer to Buru as Kinslayer, that detail is not given enough attention overall to justify naming the entire book after it, since the reason behind the name isn't even explained until book 3. But anyway, in addition to Kinslayer setting all this up, this whole sequence of events is how Yukiko ultimately learns that she can't rely on anger and hate alone to make her strong, since it was her love for her father and for Buru that ultimately gave her strength. The problem is that this entire chain of events feels like a massive detour, and I think there could have been a much better way for things to unfold and still achieve what was needed. Kaya could have journeyed to the Shima wilderness not expecting to run into other Arashitora there. There could have been reports of Morkaben scouts in Shima to foreshadow their invasion. Maybe Pyotr is part of a scouting party that gets captured, and it turns out he volunteered just so he could come to Shima and try to fulfill his promise to Misaki's husband. And ultimately, Yukiko could have still learned the intended lesson. The only difference is she would have done so while still firmly entrenched in the main plot where she should be. But there's one more important detail revealed at the end of this detour plotline that's actually part of a bigger problem with Kinslayer and later Endsinger too. And that problem lies with the plot twists. Now, this series can certainly pull off a good twist. A great example would be from Stormdancer, when we're misled into thinking Yukiko inherited the kenning from her mother, only to find out in the end that it was actually her father who had the gift all along, but he was suppressing it through his addiction. Another good twist is when it's revealed in Kinslayer that Hannah's eye patch was actually just a cover for her mismatched eye. But overall, the twists in Kinslayer lean strongly toward cliché and nonsensical. To start, we learn pretty early on that Hiro and Aisha, two characters thought firmly to be dead, are actually still alive. Now, normally it's bad enough to have one character questionably resurrected by the narrative, but having two practically right next to each other is definitely worse. Though I will admit the reveal of what exactly it costs to bring back Aisha from the brink was unsettling in a way that felt painfully believable and really stuck with me. So I will give props to that. But I wasn't terribly impressed with the handling of Aisha's character overall, since she felt incredibly underutilized. Over the course of both Stormdancer and Kinslayer, she doesn't get to do much of anything. She exists to inspire/motivate other characters like Michi and Yukiko, or else be used as a prop by Hiro and the guild. And frankly, I think her character deserved better. Anyway, let's address the crowning jewel of bad twists in Kinslayer: Yukiko's pregnancy. Not only is this horribly cliche, right down to her carrying fraternal twins,
and there's often twins as well. Oh, they're not identical and they're not the same gender. They have to be a boy twin and a girl twin. Like, did you ever read those Star Wars novels where Leia and Han have like the boy twin and the girl twin? Yeah, like that.
But this twist also destroys any believability this book had, because we're supposed to believe that Yukiko's pregnancy somehow lasted, despite the fact that A, Yukiko was heavily drinking for an extended period of time, B, she was put through extreme physical and emotional duress, such as being exposed to extreme weather for days on end with hardly a chance to rest, being separated from Buru while he's wounded, being captured and beaten by more Cabins. Slight trigger warning here, but at one point Yukiko is straight up kicked in the stomach. See, her brain is under so much strain from her increased powers that she is constantly getting severe nosebleeds and migraines. And D, she very nearly drowns at one point. We're also supposed to believe that Buru somehow didn't sense the twins, even though Kaya was able to, despite being in proximity to Yukiko for only a limited period of time. Lastly, as the icing on this horrible cake, we learn that Yukiko's pregnancy is actually the reason the kenning became so much stronger for her. And I have some choice things to say about that, but I will save it for later. On a more positive note, I really enjoyed Hannah's plotline, how it built up intrigue around her through introducing her by her codename No One, how it reintroduced Akihito into the story, and how it culminated in the fascinating reveal of Hannah's hidden eye, which I touched on earlier. I also felt the story did a good job of making her character feel distinct from Yukiko. And as for Yukiko herself, I enjoyed seeing her pushing and testing the limits of her growing power. By the way, quick reminder that if you're enjoying the video, be sure to give it a like, share it around, and consider subscribing to the channel or offering support through Super Thanks or Patreon. Thank you very much. Now let's move on to Endsinger. With Endsinger, it feels at times like the book is almost purposely sabotaging itself. One such moment was this weird fourth wall break by Michi that completely took me out of the story. Why call attention to this trope? Another example is how the story interrupts a gripping scene like Hannah trying to convince the Morkaban army to spare Kaigan City with the most basic relationship drama ever. Speaking of which, I hate the relationship between Hannah and Akihito. And the reason why can be summed up in 2 words: age gap. You see, while Akihito is nearing his 30s, Hannah is 17!
Disgusting!
In Kinslayer, Akihito explicitly viewed Hana as a child. Yet even after Hana's outburst and Akihito's subsequent apology, we don't really see much of a changed mentality. In fact, there's really no progression to this romance at all. This line in Endsinger is the only indication of attraction from Akihito that we get before they straight up start making out.
Disgusting!
Thanks a lot, Kristoff, for ruining a great character by turning him into a total creep. And just to be absolutely clear, Hana's rant about not being a child doesn't matter, because she is a child. Worse still, she is a child who has been deeply traumatized, which makes her vulnerable. So there is really no other way to view this than Akihito taking advantage of a child. And to make matters worse, this repulsive relationship adds nothing to the story. No, scratch that. It actively damages the story, which I'll expound on later. And this issue could have been so easily fixed by either aging up Hana and Yoshi to their early 20s, so they'd still be young, but not so young that a relationship with a 28-year-old feels reprehensible. Or Hana could have been given a love interest closer to her current age. A good candidate, I think, would have been Michi, since Hana started exchanging notes with Michi around the same time she met Akihito, and Akihito and Michi's death scenes happen very close together, so they'd have about the same period of time to bond with Hana, meaning little to no changes would need to be made to the timeline. Michi could still manipulate Ichizo, but there would be no real feelings there. Or maybe there is, and those feelings create inner conflict for Michi, as she finds herself also developing feelings for the girl she's been passing notes with. Plus, having a budding romance between Hana and Michi would present an opportunity to really build anticipation to the moment when they meet face to face. There could even be a fun moment at the end of Kinslayer where, despite Michi being covered in blood from having just fought her way to freedom, Hana, upon seeing her, can't help but think she's the most beautiful girl in the world. Lastly, having Michi as Hana's love interest would remedy one of the most egregious faults of Hana and Akihito's relationship. That being the fact that it robs Hana of her full potential. Hana's connection to the Morkaben goddess starts building up from the moment her eye is revealed in Kinslayer. But instead of bringing that plotline to a satisfying crescendo by having Hana be essentially reborn as both Stormdancer and Witch, it's ripped away at the last second when it's revealed that Hana has been spoiled by sleeping with Akihito, which is frankly
disgusting!
Ferdy's Goodreads review on Endsinger sums it up pretty nicely. Thank you, Ferdy. And in addition to the issue they raised, I'll point out that it just adds further insult to injury, how Hana is being singled out with this narrative punishment. I'll talk about the consequences for Akihito in a moment, but just imagine if Yukiko had lost the kenning because of sleeping with Hiro. I think it's safe to say we would all be outraged. And it's not any less terrible in Hana's case, regardless of her being a secondary character. I could understand to an extent if the author was afraid that Hana having additional powers would cause her to outshine Yukiko. But A, Yukiko is much, much stronger with the kenning than Hana. And B, Hana would have only just received her witch powers, so she would still be learning to use them. So the chances of her truly outshining Yukiko would be slim to none. There is really no justification for this. And it ultimately removes the most unique part of Hana's character, the very thing that set her apart from Yukiko. As it is, Hana after this point gets little to no attention. She's practically forgotten in the final battle, where she could have and should have been vital. And this fact is made all the more painful by how there was a role left empty by Katja that Hana could have stepped up to fill. Since Katja refused to help in the fight against Izanami's horde, Hana, as a newfound witch, could have guided the Morkaben armies in her place. But no, she is robbed of this choice for a genuinely horrible reason. And unfortunately, this baffling treatment of one of the story's female leads is about to become more than a one-off. But I'm getting ahead of myself again, so let's talk about Akihito's death. It's clearly meant to be this devastating moment, but I just couldn't bring myself to care. His character had already been completely ruined, and to make matters worse, his death just felt forced and stupid. Katya clearly intended to hurt him. Pyotr was yelling at him to run, but Akihito just stood there and didn't even attempt to defend himself or even just evade her attack. Yet later on, his death is passed off as some heroic sacrifice. Despite how, you can correct me if I'm wrong, his is the only significant character death which does not take place in battle. Hell, even Hiro, who hardly made any significant contribution to the final battle, still had a more respectable death than Akihito. So after yet another cliche twist, that being Buru having a secret son, who isn't even truly relevant until the epilogue, we come to the beginning of the end for the Lotus War series, where the characters all come together to face the ultimate threat. But to be honest, there are one or two characters here that I feel don't belong. Those characters being Hiro and Kaori. Their last-minute redemptions, frankly, do not feel deserved. They both brought about misery and death through their actions. And while yes, they were also victims of Yoritomo, Hiro through brainwashing and Kaori through the brutality inflicted on her, that doesn't mean they deserve redemption. Most often, the sad reality is that victims become people who victimize others, and they don't change for the better. And ignoring this in favor of a last-minute, out-of-the-blue turn to good feels tonally out of place for a series as dark as Lotus War. But anyway, let's get to the finale, the moment when we'd expect our protagonist Yukiko to shine the brightest, right? Right? Well, unfortunately for Yukiko, after Yoshi discovered that Stormdancer blood can be used to heal the earth and close the rift created by Izanami, he and Buru plotted to foil Yukiko's plan to sacrifice herself so that Yoshi could be sacrificed in her stead. Firstly, this is incredibly stupid, because after establishing that a single drop of Stormdancer blood could cure 10 whole feet of poisoned land, if they just stopped and thought about it for 5 more seconds, they would have realized that none of them needed to die. They have 3 Stormdancers and they only need 1 to close the rift. But there's a lot more blood inside 3 people than there is in 1. Hell, I even did the math! One person has 5 liters of blood in their body, and you can lose about 1.5 liters before passing out. So if they all contributed that amount, that would be 4.5 liters. And unless you expect me to believe that last half a liter is somehow crucial, I think that would more than suffice. Secondly, this is beyond insulting to Yukiko's character. She is literally pushed out of the way so that Yoshi can have the grand heroic moment in her place. And as much as I love Yoshi's character, he is several times removed from the position of leading character and was hardly even relevant for the majority of Endsinger. This isn't even a case of Yoshi only being able to do this because of something Yukiko did to pave the way for him, or even just help him take a step forward in his character journey. In fact, Yukiko had nothing to do with Yoshi's character journey. And because Yoshi was the one who discovered the secret of Stormdancer blood and he and Buru opted to keep it secret, Yukiko was left to play catch-up rather than being able to contribute, even unintentionally, to their plans for heroism. Seriously, this is the equivalent of Lord of the Rings ending with Gimli punting Frodo out of the way so he could then throw the ring into the lava himself. Or if Hunger Games had ended with Joanna sabotaging Katniss's shot so she could kill Coin. Or if in Return of the Jedi, Chewbacca had shown up on the second Death Star and then been the one to convince Vader to turn against Palpatine instead of Luke. Do any of those sound like satisfying endings? No, I didn't think so. And the reason for Yukiko being displaced from this powerful moment is her pregnancy. So now I'm forced to ask the question, what purpose exactly did Yukiko's pregnancy serve in the story? And the answer is 3 things. Giving her an unexplained power boost, motivating Hiro's sudden turn to good, and serving as justification for Yukiko being displaced by Yoshi. And all of these aspects have one thing in common. Yukiko had no choice. Becoming stronger with the Kenin was not a choice she made. Her pregnancy being revealed to Hiro was not a choice she made. And in the end, Buru and Yoshi took the ultimate choice away from her. Even her pregnancy itself was not something she chose. It only served as an excuse to rob Yukiko of her autonomy over and over and over. I swear, sometimes I just think men should be banned from writing women, and reading stuff like this doesn't help. Kristoff couldn't simply let his female characters rise to their full potential. No, he had to conjure excuses to drag them down or push them aside so that his male characters could get more attention, more acclaim. But speaking of the male characters, it's time to address Ken. Specifically how his character is handled over the course of the trilogy, because seriously, what the hell was going on with Ken? In the first book, there's a moment where Yukiko comes to believe that Ken betrayed her to Yoritomo, and it's revealed pretty much immediately that no, he didn't. Then apparently, Kristoff decided it'd be a good idea to take that moment and turn it into Ken's entire character. In book 2, we're led to believe that Ken betrayed Yukiko and the Kage. But keep in mind that Yukiko, by all appearances, had ditched everyone. And the Kage just spent the entire time hating Ken for no good reason, showing a general callous disregard for him with some vicious beatings sprinkled in for emphasis. Not to mention, they were thought to have sabotaged the weapons he created to help them and assaulted his fellow guild defector Ayane. All things considered, I think those are pretty good reasons to turn against your so-called allies. In my opinion, the author should have committed to Ken taking genuine revenge against the Kage. But no. In book 3, it's revealed not only that Ayane was a guild plant and staged the latter 2 incidents, but Ken knew this and faked his betrayal to infiltrate the guild. And this comes back to the issue of bad plot twists plaguing the latter 2 books. The story takes a twist, only to undo that twist later on and pretend it's a brand new twist, when really all it's done is bring us right back where it started. Truly, what genius storytelling. And this reveal does nothing to address the reprehensible actions that the Kage did commit. Those beatings weren't fake. To be honest, even if Ken's betrayal had been real, in my opinion, it still wouldn't have qualified as a betrayal at all, because the Kage were awful. Anyway, just to be fair, since I did make a point of addressing the things I enjoyed in Stormdancer and Kinslayer, I'll do the same for Endsinger. Even though these plotlines ended badly, I did enjoy Yoshi's character arc for the most part, as well as Hana's journey to uncovering her heritage and her connection to the Morkaben goddess. And Yukiko's general badassery was always a treat to see, especially her confrontation with Suka in the Everstorm. Lastly, pretty much any time Michi was on the page was great. And for overall positives, one aspect of the series I fairly consistently enjoyed was the vivid descriptions, though there certainly were times where it just felt overly wordy. Anyway, upon finishing the series, I got curious and decided to see what other people had to say about it. I couldn't find much in the way of reviews for Lotus War on YouTube, so I hopped over to Goodreads to check out the written reviews. And while the majority appeared highly positive, I was very quickly blindsided by this recurring complaint. I love that this isn't just another young adult novel with white American kids. I love that authors are stepping outside their comfort zone and writing about other cultures, but was any research actually done when writing Stormdancer? This book is like what would happen if someone went into a Japanese tourist shop and decided to write about the culture based on it. For some reason, I didn't really peg Stormdancer as a weeboo outing. There was no good reason, and yet I expected Kristoff to be a scholar of some sort, or at least to do some very in-depth scholarly research born of a deep interest in and respect for Japanese culture. What I thoroughly did not expect was to get a book informed by Wikipedia and anime set in Japan for the sake of novelty. I think in terms of cultural representation, the Lotus War is pretty gross. I think it's lazy, exotifying, frequently reliant on Western fantasy tropes and attitudes, even when they make no sense in the setting, and I think that most of what was intact and researched and detailed was the shiny, pretty, totally marketable aesthetic. And I think that uncritical glorification of this book and books like it are part of what keeps us from getting better things. You know, it really sets my teeth on edge when all along this book was heavily marketed as kind of like a book set in some sort of alternate history version of Japan with an added splash of fantasy and steampunk, only it's really a Japanese-inspired story set in an alternate world. The Japanese elements of this story are so heavily borrowed to create a world just like Japan that I'm super critical. I didn't know until later, but it really upset me that the extent of the author's research was only via Wikipedia and by watching anime. Really? Really? My culture and heritage is not something you can skip through a 5-minute perusal of links on Wikipedia and splash something together and say it's a great homage to it. I just want to put out one last note. The green f***ing eyes. This is one of my biggest oh no-nos. You have a diverse character who is made all the more special beautiful because she/he has blue, green, violet, rainbow eyes. AKA, you are taking a character of color and you're giving them a Caucasian trait/symbol of beauty that makes them even more beautiful than anyone else around them. I go bat when I see this. And yes, a character in this text, the lusted after teenage samurai lord, has sea green eyes. When reading these reviews, I was absolutely flabbergasted at the fact that the issues they were describing somehow completely evaded my attention. Though there was one thing I did pick up on that I feel falls into a similar vein, and that's how Christoph describes certain physical traits of his POC characters, particularly his female characters. He repeatedly describes their lips as bee-stung or bruised in order to indicate how they have full lips or that the pigment in their lips is a little darker than the rest of their face. And it just feels off-putting because it's making something totally natural sound unnatural. But speaking of how the female characters are described, there was another issue I saw raised by a number of reviewers on Goodreads. The blatant of women. It drove me nuts. For an author whose books are apparently supposed to have strong female characters, over half the time those characters are being described for their looks. The male gaze is pretty prevalent in here. One scene that really grossed me out is that Yukiko's identity is discovered by boys who peep on her when she goes to take a bath. Really? Really? That's the only feasible way you could have had your plot move forward? By having guys peep on her? You couldn't have, say, had her tattoos uncovered when she's fighting monsters or something? I don't know, something less creepy. Cinna also goes in depth into this, so if you're interested, you can check out their full review on Kinslayer. Lastly, I just wanted to share this review from Katie because it's pure gold. Rating problematic books 1 star is a form of self-care all in itself. But hang on, maybe we're being too harsh. After all, this is J. Kristoff's debut series, and most of the time, your first isn't your best. So maybe once Kristoff got the Lotus War out of his system, he finally learned from his mistakes and started to improve. Let's take a look at the reviews on one of his other books, just to see if, never mind. Ultimately, when it comes to Lotus War, there is really no excuse for just how bad it is. Kristoff's Japanese steampunk story can't be bothered to accurately portray Japanese language, culture, or people, and his strong female lead is repeatedly robbed of her autonomy. So would I recommend the series? No, absolutely not. Which is genuinely disappointing to say, because the good that these books do have to offer is really good. So it's not surprising that they're as popular as they are. But as Cinna said, uncritical glorification of this book and books like it are part of what keep us from getting better things. Anyway, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. And if you enjoyed, be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel to stay tuned for future content. This is only my my second book series review, but I'm absolutely hoping to do more book-related content in future. In the meantime, you can drop a comment below to let me know your thoughts on this review and whether or not you agreed or disagreed with any of my points. Last but not least, if you want to support the channel, you can do so through Super Thanks or Patreon. As always, a massive thanks to our current patrons, Lucky Kennedy, Mix and Match, The Jackish, and John Hatton. Your support is hugely appreciated. Don't forget to stay loud and proud, folks. I'm your Albi, and I will see you next time. I want to say Morkabin, but that sounds stupid, so I am going to say Morkabin. Which doesn't sound that much better, to be honest, but it sounds better than Morkabin. That's repeatedly. I always read it as Aisha, but it's Aisha. My brain and my mouth are not connecting there. I said 4 this time. I got it right. I almost said Wikipedia, bro. I'm so deep in Star Wars. My vocal fry is killing me. Which is genuinely disappointing to say because the books that these books have to offer. That makes sense. You know, another drink.